Words of Warning, Annotated Updated Edition, for those wavering between belief and unbelief. Written by Charles H. Spurgeon, narrated by Saethon Williams. Chapter 1. The Great World Prison and the Liberator. When I was preaching in Dover, England, the mayor of the town let us rent the old town hall for our service. As I was walking by the building, I noticed a large number of windows on the lower level, with metal bars on them. These windows belonged to the prison cells, where the prisoners were confined. It struck me as an unusual combination, that we would be preaching the gospel of liberty on one level of the building, while there were prisoners of the law beneath us. Perhaps the prisoners heard us when we sang praises to God, but the words of freedom above did not give them liberty, nor did the words of the song free them from their bonds. What an accurate picture this is of many people! We preach liberty to captives, and proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, but how many remain year after year in the bondage of Satan, slaves to sin? We send up our songs of praise joyously to our Father who is in heaven, but our praises cannot give them joy because their hearts are not used to gratitude. Some are mourning because of unpardoned sin. Others are weeping because of their ruined hopes, because they have looked for comfort where it can never be found. This little circumstance fixed itself in my mind, and impressed itself upon me in my private meditations. I daydreamed that some angelic warden was leading me along the corridors of this great world prison. He asked me to look into the various cells where the prisoners were confined, and he kept reminding me, as I looked sorrowful, that it is God who sets the prisoners free. Scripture: He who does justice unto the oppressed, who gives bread to the hungry, the Lord looses the prisoners. Psalm 146:7. The first cell is called the common prison, the ward of sin. All people have been prisoners here. Those who today live in perfect liberty once wore the heavy chains and were confined within the dark walls. I entered the cell, and instead of hearing cries of mourning and lament, I heard loud and repeated bursts of laughter. The atmosphere was boisterous and noisy. The profane were cursing and blaspheming. Others shouted as though they had found a great treasure. I looked into the faces of some of the criminals and saw much happiness. Their attitude was that of wedding guests rather than prisoners. Walking back and forth, I noticed prisoners who boasted that they were free. When I spoke to them of their prison and urged them to escape, they resented my advice, saying, "We were born free, and were never in bondage to anyone." Scripture: They answered him, We are Abraham's seed, and we have never served anyone. How sayest thou, Ye shall be set free? John 8:33. They asked me to prove my words. When I pointed to the iron chains on their wrists, they laughed at me, and said that the chains were ornaments that produced music as they moved. They said it was only my dull and depressing mind that made me talk of jangling shackles and jingling chains. There were men shackled hard and fast to foul and evil sins, and they called themselves free livers, while others, whose very thoughts were bound, because the iron had entered into their soul, cried out to me with proud looks that they were free-thinkers. I had never seen such prisoners before, nor any so securely bound as these. But one thing I noticed as I walked throughout this prison was that those most bound by chains and shackles thought themselves to be the most free, and those who were in the darkest part of the dungeon thought they had the most light. Those whom I considered to be the most wretched and the most to be pitied were the very ones who laughed the most and shouted most insanely and boisterously in their amusement. I looked with sorrow. But then I saw a bright spirit touch a prisoner on the shoulder, who then withdrew with the shining one. He went out, and I knew that the prisoner had been loosed from the house of bondage, because I had read,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?